הרשות הרביעית, מאת דוקטור אלון גלעדי. פרק ב' מהי הרשות הרביעית? מסגרת יישומית. הצעה למבנה יישומי חדש של המדינה הדמוקרטית-ליברלית. ראשון, כללי.
The applied chapter proposed here is seemingly in the nature of creating something from nothing, but in practice, its origin is in an intellectual, practical, historical process. Its practical foundations exist already now in the democratic liberal society and await careful direction, just as its intellectual foundations are found, among other things, in the intellectual and practical voids revealed in central liberal views as detailed above. The goal of this chapter will be to open a door for a practical discussion regarding the new outlook detailed above, the meaning of which is, among other things, a structural change within the framework of a comprehensive social constitution for the modern state. The central claim which will be presented in this chapter will be that, assuming I have proven that there is a place from a liberal thought perspective for the existence of the fourth branch, behold, this matter is also within the realm of the possible in a procedural, substantive, democratic gradual structure, as a correction and as an addition to the existing institutions in the democratic liberal states. And in other words, that the laying of a clear and corrective institutional infrastructure within the existing framework is within the realm of the possible as a middle way, which is likely to begin a gradual and democratic process of recovery and correction in Western society toward the narrowing of gaps. A narrowing whose meaning is balance and restraint between the forces possessing weight and need in society that influence the human ability to develop an autonomous socio-economic will, which will enable him, with the help of the renewing state, to constitute not only a participating, influential, and achievement-capable factor in the political, economic, and social existence, but also to find his own way toward happiness and meaning. At the opening of the discussed work, it was assumed that the historical conditions are suitable for a regimal change in the democratic liberal society of the type proposed in this work. This change will not occur through the consent of those possessing influence and means in this society. Not the persuasion of capital owners of the existence of a problem troubling the essence of the lives of most of the population is what will cause its solution, since they are well aware of it, and it does not in itself contradict their affairs, as long as social stability is maintained. By contrast, its solution is definitely liable to contradict the continuation of the hegemony currently situated in their hands. The problem of inequality and the social gaps derived from it is worsening and requires a solution which for the time being is not found. From here, the way is open to the examination of the neoliberal dogma according to which the principle of substantive equality is fine for bookshelves, for historians or philosophers in various research works, but not for reality in the free society. A basic assumption in the applied chapter before us will be, therefore, that the historical conditions for change exist, for democratic persuasion directed to the broad public through a clear and possible solution to the problem of social gaps. A solution which will preserve the democratic liberal life framework from the field of liberty, its institutions, free competition, the values of liberty, and in parallel, will enable within the framework of a democratic gradual process to return to the state the responsibility for the socio-economic social affairs of its citizens, from the direction of the principle of substantive equality. A clear solution which a reasonable possibility exists that the public will accept despite the almost certain opposition of the capital owners. Indeed, it is reasonable to assume that the partners in the existing rule, in the various branches, will not agree to waive a part of their power and hand it over to the fourth branch, except perhaps in emergency situations such as a severe social crisis threatening the general stability, etc. Indeed, the capital owners will not agree to allow the fourth branch to act freely from their influence, in clear contradiction to their interests. This is clear. This is expected. These things are true regarding every proposed change in times when the change is not visible, but the problem, is visible, exists, and is kicking. The natural development of innovative political ideas, which caused real social institutional substantive change, from the stage of theory to the stage of practice, occurred sometimes in parallel to the change itself, or after the change, and sometimes constituted a preface to the change that occurred at such or another time after the development of the theory. If Rousseau had sought to prove on paper the historical conditions for such a radical change as he proposed during the rule of the aristocracy and the monarchy, it is possible that the social contract would not have come into the world. It is possible the revolution would not have occurred. It is possible that Hegel would not have been required for his criticism toward Rousseau, and certainly Marx toward Hegel. Who knows? An additional basic assumption of this chapter will be that the combination between defined constitutional goals and authorities regarding the treatment of defined social matters, and between the very change of the constitutional identity of the one treating these matters, which are removed from the hands of the executive branch possessing neoliberal general and personal tendencies, to the hands of an independent branch representing the affair of the lower and middle socio-economic classes, and entrusted with their welfare, will have in it the capacity to completely change the agenda, the image, and the practical and moral character of the democratic liberal society toward inside and outside. The aspiration in this chapter will be, therefore, to examine the possibility of the establishment of the fourth branch out of a corrective and gradual social process, which will lead to the narrowing of social gaps to the maximum possible within a framework of a society maintaining free initiative and competition in combination with social solidarity. Within the framework of this examination, I will be required mainly for a primary discussion on the general possible outline of the branch's goals, the structure of the branch, including its organs, its budget, its personal composition, its authorities, its relations with the existing branches, and its manner of action. And all this while aspiring to the establishment of a branch that is independent, auditing, acting, checking, and balancing to the existing branches. The check here will be done through the outlining of a proposed structure in analogy from the applied conclusions derived from the intellectual chapter, and from the necessary conclusions from a comparative check of the existing branch structures in liberal democratic states, regarding the practical meaning of this solution, as well as the possibility of its implementation in a gradual manner. Since the applied chapter's concern is with the conclusions derived from the intellectual and comparative discussion, behold, for the purposes of this work, I seek to be required first to the applied discussion framework as follows.
שני, ממסקנות הגותיות לדרישות יישומיות, כללי.
For the purpose of examining the central claim in the applied chapter, I will first be required to the applied conclusions derived from the intellectual discussion regarding the need for the establishment of the social authority in the context of the struggle against social gaps. These conclusions must constitute a basis and the constitutional foundation for the action of the social authority in the democratic liberal society. First, it is clear that the social authority must integrate with the branches entrusted with the protection of the individual's life, liberty, and property from the aspects of the problem of inequality, social gaps, and the minimum conditions required for a person for both personal and communal autonomous life. Therefore, its action toward narrowing gaps must be a derivative of granting these rights, in analogy to the first or second social contract from the individuals to the state. Just as the granting of protection over the aforementioned rights had to be done through a democratic process and within the framework of the democratic regime, so too the action of narrowing gaps, namely the protection of the weak and middle socioeconomic classes, must be in a manner that possesses a democratic representative choice, while integrating with the action of the other branches, so that the protection of the other vital needs of the individual will not be harmed. This action will be directed toward the existence of threshold conditions, as an artificial striving toward the state of nature from the aspects of property in the sense of providing a person with an equal opportunity to work his property according to his talent and energy for the purpose of maintaining personal and communal autonomous life as one. That is to say, not only a change in the conditions of property accumulation is required here, but mainly the provision of a material educational possibility for a person to do with his property in a free and possible manner according to his ability. The corrective protection of the individual's property will come simultaneously with the dissipation of the capital owner's control over state institutions and the injury created because of it, to the possibility for real change in the status of the lower and middle socioeconomic layers. This need requires the establishment of a legislative authority different from the existing one, in the sense that it shall also possess legislative aspects as a separate part of the complete legislative authority. Separate but united, devoid of the direct influence of capital owners, possessing an orientation different from the utilitarian one, but balanced and restrained by the existing authorities. The establishment and action of the social authority must be done within the democratic framework and in a manner that will not invite, all the more so hint about, action by other means such as a revolution, or taking over the government, or basing the government in a different form for any reason whatever it may be, as well as it shall not be for the purpose of creating the same lady, but in the cloak's encumbrance. Since we are dealing with a democratic free correction, behold, the social authority must act to correct the existing situation, not by disproportionate injury to previous achievements from the field of liberty, such as freedom of choice, freedom of occupation, free initiative, the right to private property, etc., which were achieved until now. Here it is worthy to note that every correction of discrimination or other anomaly has in it a dimension of injury to another principle, the extent of which is likely to change with time, or with the achievement of the correction's goal, and therefore I would say at this stage that the injury, if it be, to formal equality, cannot be substantive but corrective. Within the framework of equalizing the status of Rawls's first and second principles against the previous state of preferring the first over the second. The social authority must strive for the individual's autonomy, for the individual's happiness, and in the sense that it has not to intervene in the individual's civil, economic, social activity in a direct manner, but to influence the individual's lack of ability to function in an independent civil manner, namely, to strive for social economic equality of opportunity. Therefore, on the plane of civil social activity, social, voluntary, philanthropic bodies, its activity can and must be directed, advisory but also direct, and this while encouraging but in no way canceling or taking over these civil activities, but in a trend of completing them toward an all-society format. Its action will bring to expression the will of individuals in society, while placing emphasis on the welfare of all its citizens, through concentrating the capabilities and the will of the general society for action for this welfare, out of recognition that there is not enough, neither conceptually nor practically, in civil private actions in the social field for the purpose of solving the issue of social gaps. The branch will replace or balance the control of the capital owners and the sporadic influence of social organizations in an integrated action of cultivating these organizations, while taking the social responsibility for social gaps in the state as part of its fundamental goals. These actions can include work for the supervision and direction of profit-oriented institutions, acting within the framework of the social authority's goals as a mediating factor, but this time possessing much more extensive and significant authorities. As a state body possessing weight and true social orientation in those fields where there is no injury to liberty, which will act with authority with and against all social bodies in an integrated, cultivating manner, directed toward encouragement, as distinguished from intervention and power struggles, both in local government, both in the society's voluntary and profit-oriented organizations, and through other direct and indirect institutions. This action must be done out of recognition of the equal status of Rawls's second principle, whose concern is with equality, as opposed to the first principle, whose concern is with liberty. From here also, the importance to the status, to the restrained independence of the social authority, as well as the legislative and executive authorities, which will be given to it for the implementation of this principle, in analogy to the branches of Rawls's background institutions, which will be moved from their vague location to the front and center of the political stage. Equality of opportunity in education, in employment, in economic activity, special payments for determining a social minimum, help in income by negative taxation, through the branches of reduction, stability, transfer, and distribution, which will be discussed and performed within a framework separate from that infected today with a distinct conflict of interests, which does not enable their minimal, not to say optimal, existence. Rawls's background institutions will therefore be promoted to the front of the practical stage and integrated into flesh and blood institutions, in social executive offices as well as in the local and general institutions of the independent social authority, both in its goals, the outlining of its authorities, its institutions, and its way of action. And in other words, in the equal status implementation of the second principle derived from the original position. From the conclusions regarding Locke's first contract and Rawls's second, it is also derived that the goals and the framework of action of the social authority must be established through a constitution or basic laws, since it constitutes part of the city, possessing equal status to the branches which arose for reasons of liberty. These basic rules must also give their mind to preventing the development of the branch as a power-sucking, authority and excess budget bureaucratic body of the kind our eyes witnessed in the welfare states, and which consumed its power and goals. Therefore, the role of the branch must bear a coordinating, supervising, but also operated, and sometimes budgeting character, toward as many bodies and institutions as possible from civil society, profit-oriented or acting in a voluntary manner, whose goal is helping the fellow human, and all this without nullifying the need and the possibility to establish governmental or semi-governmental bodies in vital social fields. The balances involved in the action of the social authority should be determined in a constitutive and specific manner, as one through internal struggle and debate, and with the other branches. Here, a possibility of integrated action is possible, namely, the participation of the branch's representatives within existing social bodies, or the addition of manpower to these bodies after suitable professional training, for example from the sector of the unemployed or from the sector of those possessing minimum and partial salaries. Apart from this activity, it is appropriate that the social authority act with its general and specific means for professional training, for supervision of the performance of social legislation such as minimum wage, help to medium and small businesses according to clear and equal criteria, whether by its own means or in legislation against the other branches. The cultivation of communal activity, whether through the existing, changing social organizations or directly by the social authority, can be performed also while cooperating. For example, with existing welfare and education authorities and local governments, by their integration or the integration into them of the social authority's people. Granting the equal status to the social authority has rights by its side, but also duties. It must be outlined in a balanced, checking, restrained, and restraining manner against the other branches, so that it shall act within the democratic liberal framework enabling its existence. The implementation of the principle of liberty in an equal status that is not inferior nor superior to the implementation of the principle of social justice. The social authority will not act for the cancellation of existing institutions or for superiority over the institutions derived from the principle of liberty, but for restraint, checking, and competition with them in an equal manner between different principles and approaches, but equal in social status. The conclusion discussed in this work from Montesquieu's theory is not exhausted only in the manner of the branches functioning against the other branches, namely in a checking manner, etc., but also to the fence of its authorities within the framework of the goals of the democratic society, namely, to the existence of the democratic aspects of his theory from the direction of equality, both because of its very meaning and because of the need for preventing the process of the disintegration of liberal democracy. Therefore, it will be proposed that the social authority be founded first and foremost on the principle of good virtues, which is the basic principle preserving democracy from that natural process of degeneration and corruption. And all this in the sense of love of equality and contentment with little, both regarding its composition and regarding its actual and symbolic role as one. Both as to the process of electing its members, their remuneration, their behavior, and the realization of the branch's goals through its means and authorities, in an internal manner in its institutions toward the population to which its practical activity is dedicated, and in an external manner toward the other branches, toward society as a whole. The personal example which the people of the branch will be requested and obligated to project shall be of modesty, proportionality, politeness, absence of bias, and such like, and its rules will be put in writing both in a general constitutional manner and in a particular internal manner, for example, through suitable and clear ethics rules. The elected officials of the social authority and the office holders in it will be obligated in a constitutional, legal, and ethical manner to strict rules regarding connections with capital owners. My intention here is to first rate directives that are beyond the prohibition on criminal corruption, in a normative formal parallel to the bias prohibition rules practiced in the judicial branch, namely, to prevent concern, even for appearance's sake, of connection and influence of capital owners. The behavior of the branch's people will be the external and practical way in which its general and particular messages will be expressed in the day-to-day contact between it and the citizens and the other branches. The social authority is supposed to bring a new spirit, also for the revival of other values, agreed upon but forgotten, such as fairness, contentment with little, but not in a way that neutralizes the requested self-autonomy, respectful treatment of the fellow human, whoever they may be, reducing the exclusive importance of the monetary material dimension in our lives, especially as far as matters concern that commercial democracy in which we live. Beyond this, the social authority will act to open windows of equal opportunity, both by indirect means, such as professional training, or by direct means, such as investments in adjustment to its goals and/or development of initiated works, allocation of real estate in adjustment to the rehabilitation and encouragement of the weak and middle sector, and such like, as well as by struggle against the executive branch. These means will not be drastic, revolutionary, such as renewed general land distribution, or abolition of private property, or nationalization of the means of production in society and such like, but gradual, corrective, built-in, adjusted to the results of the competition and the struggle against the executive branch in a complex reality different from those early days of the land of unlimited possibilities. The social authority must act in a corrective manner, but with authorities more extensive than those proposed by Rousseau, namely, not only a delaying power, but an active power, legislative and executive, restraining and restrained. This power, its source and authority will be from the people, from its wills, and not in a manner that is external to the city. From here that it will have the possibility in a constitutional, clear, regulated and balanced manner to act for the solution of the problem of lack of balance in society, which was created in a reality in which those bodies constituting the city enable the continued existence and intensification of social gaps in the democratic liberal society. The establishment of the social authority must take into account the danger of stagnation in the state's functioning, or the decentralization of its unity, namely, the violation of the harmony, if it exists, between the classical parts of the state, family, civil society, and state authorities, and it will act for the mending and healing of the rifts and tears revealed in this harmony due to the one-sided action of neoliberalism and its core social gaps. The role of the branch will not be reduced to the authorities it received, but as stated, will bear a competitive balancing character toward the other branches in a reciprocal manner. As such, a mechanism must be created for integrated work between the branches, which will enable supervision and protection of existing laws, both from the efficiency aspects represented by the representatives of the executive branch and from the equality aspects represented by the representatives of the social authority. This integrated supervision and protection ought to bear a systemic particular and comprehensive character, namely, beginning from the local authorities, through the government ministries, and ending with the legislative branch. Its competitive and corrective character within the constitutional limits will enable the branch to constitute that missing aspect in the violated harmony of the existing state, so that it can balance the influence of the civil society barons on society without harming the free functioning of civil society, as far as this does not exclusively serve their personal profit goals, but rather the needs of the majority of the population from the aspects of narrowing the gaps discussed in this work. This action must also cause the professionalization and internal development of the branch, as well as its influence on another internal development of the bodies subject to its protection and supervision, and which concern the aspects of narrowing the gaps as defined in this work. Neutralizing the decisive influence of capital owners both on the state institutions and on the action of civil society from these aspects must be done in a built-in constitutional legal manner, as well as through internal ethics rules, in a manner that will enable its historical, rational, free development within the framework of the state toward the direction that will serve its goals and will not deviate from them as happened to the existing legislative branch, according to the basic assumptions of this work. The fear regarding the intensification of the social authority can and should be accompanied not only by constitutional means, namely, the struggle against the other branches and the fence of authorities and goals, but also by internal means, namely, by outlining strict internal ethics rules which will stand overlapping with the branch's base. My intention is to the branch's action on the one hand as an institution whose base is clearly in social justice, and on the other hand as an institution aware of the expected dangers in accumulated power, and seeking to create preventive internal mechanisms which will center its activity toward its goals, integrated with the functioning of society as a whole. Beyond that, the social authority must act within an institutional framework which will not cause the state mechanism to grow in an unreasonable and impossible manner at the expense of the individual's rights and possibilities, in the sense that there shall be no path for the return of the state at the expense of the individual, but for another return with the individual, a middle way and not an extreme way. Therefore, the influence of the social authority on the civil economic society, the free market, must be indirect and not direct, namely, not an influence in the sense of old centralized planning that failed, but of pointed actions within a goal-oriented whole, which will have in them to benefit the capabilities of the individuals participating in them, and indirectly with the general economic activity through bringing more and more individuals into the work circle and the competition in more and more reasonable opportunity conditions. The branch must act in a manner that will not nullify the action of the free market and will not intervene within a centralized planning framework from above in its spontaneous action, but will enable a moderating, corrective, indirect influence toward the improvement of equal opportunity conditions and the autonomy of the individuals, which will enable the reduction of gaps with the free activity of the market simultaneously. Its influence must be in an integrated manner that is both elected and professional as one, toward the expansion of the possibilities given in the hand of the individual toward free competition and private initiative, while striving for a solution to the issue of social gaps as defined in this work, including the minimum conditions for life, possessing worthy autonomy and equal opportunity, both for the poor populations and for the middle class, as well as for the reduction of the checking power of capital owners from these aspects. This action must be integrated, competitive, and checking as one with and against the existing economic institutions, such as, for example, the central bank, the treasury, the representatives of capital owners, the banks, insurance companies, and more. The people of the branch will work in parallel in a particular professional manner with these institutions, and will propose social aspects to their action, and will bring to the elected and executive institutions of the social authority, in a manner both ongoing and coordinating as one, reports regarding the actions of the executive branch and the existing civil society, as well as theoretical and practical proposals for different action, whether integrated or other from the aspects of equality and social justice. These proposals will be examined and weighed by the branch's institutions toward decisions regarding direct or indirect action against the executive branch, and mainly against the population for whose sake the branch acts. The new spirit of the social authority will lead to conceptual fertilization also in the fields of the economic discipline, since from the time the state society acts in a built-in, integrated, and not one-sided manner from an economic, social, conceptual, and practical perspective as one, behold necessarily new theories, professionals, science, and management people, possessing original thought, will be required for the purpose of harnessing to that same fertilizing struggle between the branches. The intoxicating and addictive power of money and the aspiration to be counted among its followers through outlining utilitarian policy within the framework of state authorities will be checked, and the suitable ground will be prepared for another, different, and competing thought. Thus, through the procedural substantive change in the structure of the democratic liberal society and the built-in requirement for new solutions and ways toward full employment, narrowing of gaps, outlining of minimum conditions for true autonomous action of the citizens, a new social practical economic reality will be created. A reality in which the struggle between the desire to privatize every public institution and leave it as a ripe fruit in the hands of capital owners will be replaced by a desire for a suitable and built-in balance with the vital social fields, and will outline the way toward the happiness of the free, initiating, competitive, and communal individual as one.
שלישי, ממסגרת השוואתית למסקנות יישומיות.
After showing in the intellectual chapter that the claim regarding the need for the establishment of the social authority was not refuted, according to the basic assumptions of this work, and after being required to the general applied conclusions from the intellectual discussion regarding the image of the authority, the time has come to deal with the manner of its practical implementation. The general question required for solution in this chapter will be how it is possible in a democratic, gradual manner to bring about an institutional change in the democratic liberal society, which will lead to such a deep change in the path of Western society from the direction of extreme neoliberalism, which raises to greatness mainly the values of individualism and efficiency, toward a true middle integration between free competition and initiative and socio-economic social solidarity. This change will be done in light of the lessons of the past from the extreme and middle attempts that failed, and the existing constitutional regime structure, which characterizes in a comprehensive manner, with necessary changes in each and every society, the democratic liberal states. Since this work is in an explicit manner of a procedural substantive character, at whose base stands the claim that the change longed for by the writer of the work will come from a middle direction whose beginning is in a structural change within and from within the Western society. Behold in this chapter, which deals with the very possibility for the outlining of such a structure in a gradual manner, I will be required to check the regime structure characterizing these states and in the possibility derived from it for the integration of a social authority within it. In this check, whose character is comparative sample, I will be required below to the examination of the constitutions of Western states, and also I will refer to the constitutions of several states, which according to their own definition are not of a democratic liberal structure and character, and this for the purposes of this comparison, such as the former Soviet Union, North Korea, Iran, etc. I believe it is possible at the beginning of things to argue for several clear differences from the field of constitutional structure, which I will describe through two poles between the democratic liberal states and between the people's democracies. And in other words, to those states possessing a regime that is not liberal or not democratic, or is not both of them as one, as well as to the differences between the democratic liberal states as they are. The prominent structural difference between the two ends of the aforementioned regimal spectrum, as it is envisioned from the examined constitutions, concerns the relations between the branches, including the extent of their independence. Had I sought to examine the tendency of the society whose constitution is being examined toward a people's or democratic liberal structure, out of observing their constitutions, I would be required for purposes of illustration to two ranges of checking, which for the purposes of this work, I will call them external and internal, beyond the basic difference between neoliberal democracy and a people's democracy possessing a centralized planned economy. The external compound deals with the structural aspects between the peoples and the liberal poles, while the internal deals with the structural differences between the liberal democracies themselves, between their poles, which will be called for this purpose liberal, namely possessing an emphasis on aspects of liberty and the absence of intervention on behalf of the state beyond its preservation, and democratic, namely possessing an emphasis on aspects of equality and the state's intervention for this purpose.
המתחם החיצוני.
The most prominent general structural characteristic concerning the people's democracies in their extreme form is the absence of requirement for the principle of separation of powers, including a real restriction of their independence, if it exists at all. Here it is worthy to note that also in these states one can often see a basic structural division similar to that of the West, such as, for example, for a president or chairman or prime minister or a king standing at the head of the state, as well as at the head of the executive branch. For a parliament, usually composed of two houses, one special for the federal states or regions, and the second for the federal state as a whole, and for a judicial system possessing such or another structure. However, in these states, which usually explicitly define their regime as an antithesis to the democratic liberal regime, one can discern in a general manner one of two features: the subordination of the branches to the absolute authority of one of the organs, as well as the emphasis on the absence of their independence in relation to this subordination, or the existence of an additional organ to whose authority the entire system is subordinated in this or another way. The leader in Iran, the Religious Council in Pakistan, the People's Congress in China, the Communist Party in the former Soviet Union, the President in North Korea, and more. And all this for the purpose of implementing the basic goals of the Constitution. By contrast, in the democratic liberal states, which also usually define themselves in an explicit manner as such, and emphasize the aspects of the protection of liberty in its various shades, as well as formal equality, for the purpose of this discussion, before the law, in the right to vote, etc., in the sense of Rawls's first principle, or substantive equality, for the purpose of this matter, in the sense of the second principle to Rawls, namely, minimum conditions, constitutional social concern for equal opportunity, etc. There exists a general detailed reference concerning the flexible separation between the branches, creating reciprocal relations of checking and balancing between them, as well as reference to their relative independence, and particularly prominent is the absence of an external entity to whose authority the entire system is subordinated in such or another manner. Therefore, I would call the poles of the first compound in the structural context between the two extreme types of regimes as an external compound between maximum, flexible, separation between independent branches and an opposite pole of absence of separation and structural subordination between the branches. The external scale enables us to locate the states between the poles according to their constitutions, and thus to learn about trends characterizing the Western states as far as they move away from the end seemingly derived from the definition of their regimes. In all types of regimes examined, no branch of the type proposed in this work was found.
המתחם הפנימי.
The internal compound enables us to attend to the differences between the liberal democracies themselves in a more emphasized and prominent manner. Even if it is possible to assume that a certain marginal correlation exists between the findings of the internal and external compound in this regard, behold, the emphases and the diagnoses checked are fundamentally different since they are derived from parameters different from those of the external compound. Here I seek to examine the relationship between specific branches in these states, according to their hierarchy of dominance as distinguished from their independence, and, in other words, as far as matters concern this work, in the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch in terms of their authorities and their power envisioned from their formal, updated constitutions. As far as the authorities and power of one of the branches is greater, according to the research population before us in relation to another democratic liberal state, behold, that same regime will be located accordingly toward one of the poles of the internal compound. The ends of the compound will illustrate an extreme situation in which, for example, the executive branch possesses rights approaching symbolism, and on the other hand, from the opposite direction, where the legislative branch is weakened in an extreme form to the extent of mere symbolic existence. The poles of the compound move, therefore, between dominance of the executive branch and that of the legislative branch, and this out of an assumption that the classical basis of the democratic liberal society assumes the supremacy of the latter as representing the will of the people sovereign. My claim will be that a clear trend of dominance can be identified, leaning more and more toward the executive branch at the expense of the legislative branch in all Western states, and from here we find ourselves learning of a deviation from the traditional structural basic principle of the democratic regime, at least as clarified by the enlightened tradition of the rule of the people or its volitional rule, toward a framework whose dimensions are becoming more and more symbolic when in practice matters are different, as stated in the basic assumptions of this work. In a theoretical manner, it can also be argued beyond this that a process of this kind has in it to point to a trend which at a certain stage is likely to intensify to the extent of a possible threat to the democratic regime. But this is not my goal in this work. It is enough for me to learn from this trend, if it exists, of a problem or a lack in the democratic Western structure, which constitutes an opening for an innovative and different reform of the type of the social authority. And in other words, that indeed there exists in the structure of the Western democratic society a problem as well as a reasonable possibility for democratic change, which is not revolutionary in an anti-democratic sense, but such which can and will be performed upon the existing structure. This claimed structural trend stands in one line with the assumptions of this work, according to which the democratic dimension in the neoliberal society is of a character leaning toward formal weakness, and by this, among other things, enables the class of capital owners to increase their already great influence in the corridors of government, whether through glorifying the liberal aspects of society that prepare the ground for their needs, or whether through their relations with the populations constituting the state's administration, whether in the public service or among the elected decision-makers. From a sample review of the Western constitutions, a clear picture emerges of a connection between the branches, which, even if on the declarative level, stands more or less in one scale with the structural principles of the enlightened democracy. Behold in practice, in its practical, general constitutional, and mainly financial constitutional dimensions, it raises wonder. That it is not equal in balance, and even more than that, between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Thus, a clear picture emerges and is revealed before our eyes of an asymmetrical connection between the dominant executive branch and the legislative branch. This dominance is built in with more or less weight between the types of regimes and its trend, as well as the distinct trend of the legislative branch, to internal governmental stability, in a shell whose principles naturally distance themselves from its deeds and essence that are in real life. The power and authority of the executive branch, as the matters emerge from the constitutional directives regarding the legislative process in general, and the financial legislation in particular, and in a prominent manner, teach of an increasing until truly decisive dominance of the executive branch and a noticeable weakness on the constitutional face of the society's structure regarding the legislative branch. The strengthening of the executive branch in parallel to the weakening of the parliament, the privatization of the state from its social responsibility, and the immense rise in the power of capital owners were discussed in the literature on the issue, especially in the context of the role of the modern bureaucracy after the collapse of the welfare state. In a general manner, it can be said that the welfare state intensified to the utmost the power of the modern bureaucratic mechanism, whose power was already great. Since the state removed its social responsibility from itself, it can be argued that it remained with a mechanism of immense power in the executive branch, which is now subject to the practical authority of those to whom the state's power passed, namely, the capital owners. As I noted above, the fear regarding the takeover of the few over the modern bureaucracy was expressed in a clear and lucid manner already at the beginning of the century by Max Weber. Bureaucracy was perceived as an essential tool specifically for the existence of the democratic society, but on the other hand, also as a dangerous instrument for that same democracy, when it is situated under the influence of a certain and self-interested sector, which Weber explicitly notes: the sector of capital owners. The solutions proposed for this problem are similar, in my opinion, to the solutions reviewed in the introduction chapter in this respect, that the problem is identified in such or another way, but the practical effective solution is not to be found, since the reference to the state structure on its branches is static as it is. In the instructive article of Professor Barak Erez, she points to the danger existing in an administrative state based on the entrusting of extremely extensive authorities in the hands of the bureaucratic system of the public administration, and the existence of relations of rule between this system and the individual, who in practice has no capacity for influence on its decisions. This concentration of power is expressed, among other things, in that most legislative processes are not the handiwork of the legislative body, but of administrative subsidiary legislation by the executive branch, within the legal frameworks which are extensive and comprehensive. When the statutory frameworks are extremely general and grant broad discretion to the bureaucracy, it is found that this latter in practice determines the norms. Barak Erez argues that this great power, which also includes judicial authorities of courts, administrative tribunals, such as various appeals committees on matters of licensing, taxation, and more, undermines to the utmost the principle of separation of powers in its flexible sense. The judging occurring in the executive branch is not only an incidental and adjunct activity to its executive roles, but a central and separate role that was annexed to it. To her taste, the traditional answers to these claims are not practical. The primary legislation, which delegates the authorities to the administration, became a fig leaf since it is general. There is in it no restriction at all to the executive branch's action, whose authority was of a sweeping character, such that the determination of the norms is entrusted to its bureaucracy. By contrast, the judicial review of the administration's actions is limited, both due to the limited accessibility of individuals to the legal system, information gaps, and lack of economic means. The duration of judicial litigation, limitation in the scope of intervention, such as justiciability, and the lack of sufficient expertise of the courts for the purpose of effective intervention. On the other hand, Barak Erez points to the phenomena of privatization and globalization, from which is derived the claim according to which the state and its branches shed from their intensity and their influence on the lives of citizens, and naturally the power of the administrative state is reduced. Here Barak Erez turns to the claim according to which privatization transfers centers of power and influence from the state to the hands of private factors, including influence on the privatization processes themselves and the state's functioning, namely influence on the government systems in the state. Globalization, to her taste, makes the activity of the welfare state difficult due to the transfer of economic activity to other states. Specifically because of this, the decisions made in relation to the supervision of industries, the support for them, and such like, must be part of a democratic process of decision-making, and not be made in a bureaucratic manner, controlled by organized interest groups pressing for the most part for lowering the regulative standards, and mainly of industrialists and employers. The proposals reviewed by Barak Erez for reducing the power of the bureaucracy, of the executive branch, and returning the state to its citizens focus within the existing system. According to her claim, between the model of the intervening welfare state and between the views regarding limited activity of the state, there exists a middle way, which is support for the welfare state but not for the welfare bureaucracy. Thus, for example, she proposes to attend to the problem of the loose legislative authorization by stiffening the principle of legality of the administration, namely by the side of the formal authorization in legislation, also standards and basic principles that will limit the decision-makers in the executive branch. Likewise, it is proposed by her to introduce more democratization by involving the public in the administrative process, such as by consultation, filing objections, pleading rights of a relevant public to the decisions of the administrative authority, involving public representatives in the administrative body. And in a general manner, Barak Eras points to the injury existing in the administrative state to the principle of separation of powers. Another aspect of the injury to democracy in the administrative state is expressed as stated in the injury to the principle of separation of powers. In this context, the main difficulty is not rooted in the very erosion of the absolute separation between the functions performed by the main government branches, but in the concentration of the majority of authorities in the hands of one branch, the executive branch. Here, Barak Eras proposes to develop a new principle of separation of authorities within the executive branch, as a partial substitute for the lost ideal, as she puts it, of the separation of powers. This principle will prevent concentration of legislative, judicial, and executive authorities in the hands of the same administrative factor, and will necessitate their operation by different and separate bodies, belonging indeed to the executive branch, but situated in a state of mutual independence, namely by office holders who are not dependent on the creators of the subsidiary legislation or on the officials responsible for its enforcement. However, the proposals of Barak Eras for a solution from within the existing system, within the executive branch itself, encounter, according to her own words, severe limitations. Thus, for example, that same democratization of the administrative process will specifically enable the entry of interest groups into this process, whose disproportionate influence on the legislative and administrative processes is discussed extensively in the literature regarding public choice. To this, she answers that specifically a closed process to the public tends even more in favor of organized interest groups close to the governmental plate. Opening the administrative process to participation and representation will not create a new reality, but will give validity to an existing reality on the basis of defined rules of the game. On the other hand, democratization of the administrative process is liable to harm the foundations of expertise and professionalism inherent in it, and to cause more politicization of the administration. This problem she seeks to overcome while characterizing part of the administrative actions as actions of expertise and a large part of them as representational. According to her, even if the administrative arena will be more democratic, it will be more restrained than the political arena. An additional claim is to the costs of opening the administrative process to the public, including turning it into a slow and expensive process, objections and hearing processes, which are liable to be utilized by influence groups for tactical management suitable to their needs, etc. Professor Barak Eras is aware of the problematic nature of these proposals and recognizes the warning words against reforms of this type from the utilitarian perspective. And with this to her taste, one should not return to despair from the chance for democracy in the substantive sense in the administrative state. She is aware of Professor Frug's position, according to which only strong interest groups have a real chance to realize the potential of participation in the bureaucratic process, and regarding all others, the promise is a fiction only, a formal matter. Ordinary citizens are not involved in processes of decision-making, since in practice they have no chance to influence them. But because of the formal decision for participation rights, they learn to attribute the blame for this to themselves. Therefore, according to his approach, the ways proposed until now for participation in the administrative process are only harmful in this sense that they sell illusions, and by this take from the citizens also the aspiration for a non-bureaucratic reality and the incentive to search for more radical solutions. In the opinion of Professor Barak Eras, this is a paralyzing despair that must be disputed. She agrees that the reform proposals will not create an ideal democratic reality. The participation will still be more available to some and less to others, etc. But the reforms are likely to assist in increasing public awareness of the processes of decision-making in the executive branch, and for preventing a state in which central distributive decisions are made by officials without public awareness and without legislative guidance. At the end of her article, Professor Barak Erez seeks to refer to the article of Professor Asa Kasher in that even if the contribution of the reforms will be expressed only in raising the democratic profile and no more, behold, we will be able to look back and not in anger, as a step toward blurring the traditional sorting that distinguishes between democracy and bureaucracy, while creating a new category of democratic administration. I believe that the end of the important words of Professor Frug should not teach of despair, but of striving for more radical solutions, others and perhaps parallel, at a constitutional general level, more than those proposed by Professor Barak Erez. As I noted above, the problem which the author discusses was identified in a lucid manner already by Max Weber. Nevertheless, his determination, according to which bureaucracy is an essential need of the modern society, especially the democratic one, is valid and existing. Laws are always general, and they always require subsidiary legislation which regulates the contact between the universal and the particular. Likewise, judicial authorities in certain fields within the executive branch are required by definition in the complex and complicated modern world. Weber notes with great wisdom that since a danger exists of a takeover by such or another sector over the bureaucracy, which is, as stated, essential for the functioning of the modern state, behold, the solution can be external to the bureaucratic mechanism, which is in itself essential, such as, for example, the strengthening of the parliament. It can be argued that all those solutions seeking to change the character of the bureaucracy and thereby to influence in a general manner the image of the state are seemingly doomed from a definitional perspective to failure, especially when that bureaucracy fell into the wrong hands, namely others than the hands of the people itself. Should the people lose its control over affairs, the people must return it to its hands. This matter will not be done through an action contrary to the essence of that same mechanism required for control in the modern state from within, which is liable to encumber it. All the more so, it will not neutralize the problem in question, which is the control of capital owners over affairs. Beyond this, one should note the expected opposition of the capital owners, which certainly will be done for reasons that are rational and seemingly completely reasonable from a universal utilitarian aspect, to every move that will significantly harm their ability to control and influence, including democratization of the mechanism, which is not a clear and sharp enough process and whose results are not clear in relation to the problem in question. In my opinion, an additional counter-argument is likely to be that the reasons against this move are equal in value from a procedural, substantive utilitarian perspective to the reasons in its favor, as distinguished from the identification of the problem itself. Should this position be accepted, it will be difficult in a reality of capital owners' control to be required for a real change, as distinguished perhaps from a cosmetic change, which will calm the momentary eruptions, continuous but weak at this stage, of the various parts of the socio-economic classes that are outside the class of capital owners. I believe that the proposals of the type voiced by Barak Erez are part of a general and blessed trend in my taste, seeking a cure for the weakening of democracy and the takeover by a very few over the many. However, as I noted in the introduction chapter, the attempts at substantive change from within the existing system, within the executive branch itself, even if they possess great importance regarding the trend as such, and perhaps as a certain step toward change, behold on the face of it, and also according to the instructive analysis of Barak Erez herself, they do not promise enough. It seems to me that there is a need for a solution other than going head-to-head against the existing powerful bureaucracy and the immense influence of the capital owners, who certainly are not interested in its further democratization and in the public's influence on various distributive decisions. The work before us seeks to avoid the dilemmas accompanying this type of reforms from within, which is seemingly doomed to failure in advance, at least from a perspective of a general, clear, and real solution. Specifically, the reference to the ideal of separation of powers as a lost ideal is that which points to despair. The recognition of the need in searching for solutions to the situation between the democratic state and the administrative state controlled by capital owners justifies a different requirement for the structure of the state itself. The very requirement for a solution within the executive branch itself, which seeks to attribute a certain process to several heads, whose personal preferences are also not clear, is problematic. By contrast, proposed in this work is a solution possessing a clear conceptual, socio-economic direction and adjusted to the essence of liberal democracy, which will weaken the power of the existing executive branch and will increase the power of the people through a different and stronger parliament. A solution which will separate in a constitutional manner between subjects for decision which exist entirely today in the executive branch, in a manner in which a clear conflict of interests exists. A solution ushering in a change that is not impossible and unclear from within, but a change that is external to the executive branch and internal to the state institutions as a whole, which will necessarily cause an internal change in the institutional systems of society and in society itself. In this chapter, I continued in the trend which I began in this work toward that same procedural substantive change external to the executive branch, namely, of the adding of a social authority to the existing branches, of a new structure which will rehabilitate that same lost ideal, as in the words of Barak Erez, of the separation of powers, of a structure which will enable the broad public a proper and possible representation against the immense and increasing power of the capital owners in the privatized state, which is weakening in terms of its social responsibility to its citizens.
As I showed above, the problem of the excessive power of the executive branch, which is contrary to the principle of separation of powers, is substantive at the democratic liberal constitutional level, concerning the most central process from a socio-economic perspective, namely, of the allocation of resources in society. This control of a central governmental body, which for the most part is composed of individuals who were not elected, acting according to a certain economic dogma, and who possess personal desires within and after the public service, enables the sector controlling the bureaucratic mechanism to control also the socio-economic, neoliberal image of the democratic liberal state, in a manner contradicting its comprehensive basic essence. The change of the character of control over the budget, its determination and its allocation, is the starting point for the proposed structural change. That same lack, that same substantive defect in the image of the democratic liberal state, from which one must be required in a constitutional manner for the practical establishment of the social authority. This is the primary process upon which a renewed confrontation must be conducted, in a clear, explicit, and new structural way calling for the return of the state's social responsibility toward the solution of the problem of social gaps, a problem accompanied by the weakening of the status and influence of the legislative body, of the people's representatives, the intensification of the capital owners and their influence on the executive branch, including its bureaucratic mechanisms, as well as the disappearance of the principle of separation of powers and the increasing danger to the actual existence of the democratic liberal society.
רביעי, הבית המתקן, על הקמת בית תחתון חדש בחברה הדמוקרטית-ליברלית.
It seems that the primary gradual reform in the social context may therefore be performed initially by means of filling the existing void in the field of the legislative branch. This change can and must fill a complementary, stabilizing, corrective legislative role, as well as a starting point for executive correction. This is a change possessing a built-in purpose in an institution embodying the sovereignty of the people in the democratic liberal society, which it will be proposed shall be performed, among other things, by means of establishing a second house, another, different from those existing today, alongside the Central House of Representatives in the Western parliamentary structure. At this stage, I seek to give a short survey regarding the problems accompanying the status of the Western Parliament in general, and in the context of its existence within the framework of two houses in particular, and all this in the context of the establishment of the social authority. Even if in the past the democratic liberal societies were characterized by the centrality of the parliament as expressing the will of the people or the individuals in the emerging democracy, a parliament which outlines the public agenda, decides on the issues at hand, and from which the leaders of society acting under its supervision and criticism emerge and grow. Behold, in parallel, it should not be forgotten that the right to elect and be elected were relatively limited in these golden periods, and that the parliament reflected, sometimes in an emphasized manner, the power relations specifically between the stronger populations from a socio-economic perspective, rather than those between the parts of the entire population. These rights underwent many upheavals, gradual and violent, beginning from the initial parliament, which was greatly influenced and perhaps even composed for its most part or entirely by the nobility, through a right to elect which was granted according to a minimum level of income or ownership of property, toward granting the right to vote to women, and until an equal right to vote for all citizens above a certain age, regardless of religion, race, and sex. But against the processes of its formation and the intensification of the formal and practical centrality of the parliament in days past, we witness today, alongside the phenomenon of the existence of a maximal free right to elect and be elected above a certain age, in the majority, if not all, of the democratic liberal states, a major weakening of the parliament's status, both as it is in terms of the quality of the elected officials, the quality of the discussions and their depth, both in terms of its public status and as the center of the political existence and actual influence. The core of political influence has moved today in a prominent manner in the majority of Western states to the executive branch, both the elected and the bureaucratic, whose authorities are extensive, influential, and penetrating into quasi-judicial fields, and more than that, to fields possessing a legislative or bypass legislative character, and in any case possessing a substantive influence on the parliament's practical power. This change, which possesses a seemingly practical disconnection between the people and the influence of its will on the executive, practical way of action of its elected officials, at least in the periods between election campaigns, has also increased the power of those lobbyists who have access to the corridors of the elected and bureaucratic executive branch, including the capital owners who possess a built-in, considerable, direct and indirect influence on the action of the institutional mechanisms of the executive branch in the neoliberal society. And if it is not enough that the status of the capital owners is becoming more and more central with the intensification of the privatization processes of vital institutions that were in the past under governmental public control, behold, their influence is very great on the officials of the public administration, especially at the intersections or centers of decisions involving in the present or in the future present capital and government. So too is their influence great on elected public officials who cast their eyes toward influence through the influential ones or toward private action after the public engagement. The weakening of the parliament's status is therefore a clear and distinct interest of the capital owners, as long as it is not accompanied by systemic dismantling and economic instability. This interest is diametrically opposed to a built-in interest of the majority of the public, at least as far as matters concern its democratic representative or its socio-economic aspect, namely, that its representative shall do all that is possible for the improvement of the situation of all their senders and not a minority of them. This matter of returning the practical sovereignty to all individuals and restraining or reducing the influence of the minority of capital owners on the political existence at the expense of the majority of the population is among the central affairs of the social authority, insofar as they possess a decisive influence on the issue of social gaps, for which the capital owners naturally are not among the supporters of its substantive solution, as distinguished from its artificial softening. A formal comparative review of the regime of the Western democracies shows that a non-negligible part of them is characterized by a split structure of the legislative branch. This structure, which was originally established on the basis of a requirement for a solution to early democratic needs such as regional or class representation, combined with needs for regimal stability, including the decentralization of local power centers, became anachronistic in the majority of societies, in a more or less prominent manner. This because the goals for which this institutional division was designated disappeared or were greatly reduced in the modern era. The original justification for the establishment of a second house was different from state to state, but one can discern in a general manner between two main groups of grounds for the division into two houses. The one, states in which the second house is a product of a federal or regional structure, Germany and the United States, for example. And the second, states in which the upper house is a remnant of the traditional ceremonial character of the state in days past, Britain, France. As opposed to the weakening of the status of the split parliament for integrated reasons of anachronism and the intensification of the executive branch, one can see a type of unease also in the smaller democratic liberal states, in which one house exists both due to its weakness against the other branches and due to the defects that have spread in it and in the executive branch derived from it and overshadowing its status, especially regarding the connection between capital and government. In a discussion which took place in the year 2002 between Israeli scholars and prominent politicians from the right and the left, the issue of the need for the establishment of a second house in Israel arose. It seems that alongside the feeling which characterized a significant part of the participants that there is a place to establish an additional parliamentary body which will audit, check, stabilize, and supervise the existing legislative body, and perhaps even elevate its symbolic and practical status as one, a question stood out regarding the manner of the applied performance of this change, and especially how it will be possible to avoid the establishment of a body to which all those governmental defects standing at the base of the desire to establish it will stick. The hesitation revolved, among other things, around the type of institution required for reform in the existing political system, in which phenomena of corruption will not be revealed, including improper influences of capital owners, which are the lot of the existing institution. Here, the possibility for the establishment of a constitutional court, or a supervisory house, or an auditor, or a house that will be elected on the basis of an orientation toward local government was examined, and even proposals for a link toward diaspora Jewry. But in my opinion, the perplexity or the inability to find a serious anchor for intellectual realization of the feeling of most participants in the discussion regarding the need for the establishment of a second house stemmed, among other things, from the absence of a solid conceptual basis for the establishment of a body of this kind. Besides the desire to intervene in the weakness of the legislative body, radiating also on the entire governmental existence. I doubt whether the desire to supervise or audit the existing legislative action can by itself constitute a ground for a significant change in the ways of government, not only because it will indeed be difficult for it by itself to cause the establishment of another body, which necessarily reduces to some extent the authorities of the existing ruling body, but also because the extra parliamentary pressures from those for whom the current situation is beneficial, such as, for example, the capital owners, in the absence of a sweeping democratic persuasion ground, are likely to override this initiative even before it is born. On the other hand, I believe that the social authority can certainly be the answer to that same missing anchor, since its goals and its starting point include not only a response to that same general will to check, or to restrain, or to balance, or to elevate the functioning of the existing branches, but there is in it also something additional, a will for finding a response to one of the most acute problems in Western society, if not the most acute among them. The problem of the lower and middle socioeconomic classes, the problem of the neglect of the principle of substantive equality in the democratic liberal society. This will, when it is integrated with action according to basic democratic enlightened principles, can constitute a democratic catalyst possessing significant weight against the pressures of the capital owners group, through which it will be possible to establish the social authority, and within its framework, a second house balancing and checking to the first house, which will be established out of coping with a cross-cutting and conceptual social problem, discussed in this work. A house which has a different and shared agenda from that of the existing executive and legislative branch, which is auditing and corrective to the former lower house, which will now be branded as an upper house. I would call this additional house for the purposes of this work, the corrective house. The need for the establishment of the corrective house, possessing lesser but partially independent and partially integrated legislative authorities against the upper house, the Assembly of Representatives, the Knesset, stems in an integrated conceptual manner between the principle of substantive equality and the practical derivative of its neglect, namely, the problem of social gaps, which is a sort of cross-cutting problem in the context of the social contract which existed before its conclusion, and with greater intensity after the establishment of the society's institutions, and between the principle of liberty. Because of this, its solution must reside in one fold with the other derivatives of the contract, including the constitutional sovereign aspects of the transfer of powers from the people to the sovereign for the sake of protecting its rights. Beyond this, there is in the establishment of a house of this kind to provide a democratic response to the gaps of practical representativeness in an era of a weakened parliament and the influence of the capital owner's minority, as well as the granting of real legitimate power in the hands of the social authority, which similarly to the other additional houses, will be restrained and integrated with the power of the existing legislative and executive branches. In this second house, a representative and corrective legislative response will be given to the problems of the economically weaker populations, as well as legislative balance and checking to the first house out of a declared and directed aspiration of society for the narrowing of the social gap situated in it, and granting emphasis from the direction of substantive equality to the social affairs which will be placed under the responsibility of the social authority. This response will receive practical content both in general constitutional direction and within the framework of the specific democratic determinations against a changing reality and different from state to state within the branch and in relations with the other branches. The authorities of the corrective house will be defined and fenced to those clear social fields which will constitute the domain of the social authority, and to all those fields contiguous to those of the executive branch which possess a distinct influence on the lower and middle socio-economic classes, such as, among others, regarding general and specific taxation issues and social subjects such as negative tax, broad subsidies, and such like. One of the substantive issues in the examination of the establishment of a second house of this type will certainly be the manner of election and being elected to this body. And all this, among other things, within the framework of a response to a serious claim likely to arise regarding the fear of the establishment of a body possessing the same problems of the current parliament with the addition of encumbrance, split, and waste of public resources. At this stage, it is worthy to be required to this issue by raising primary ideas which will be examined within the framework of the implementation of the social authority in each and every society. The character of the second house is a corrective character, in the nature of a solution to a problem at whose center stands socio-economic inequality required for correction. A primary comparative check reveals that the houses situated alongside the classical Assembly of Representatives, elected by the entire population, are characterized by a manner of election reflecting those same needs for whose sake they arose. And from here, they do not reflect as they are the representation of the entire population. Thus, for example, the English House of Lords as an extreme example from the opposite direction to our matter, thus the French Senate as an example combining consideration in affairs of old nobility and local districts, and thus the German Bundesrat and the American Senate in all that concerns the needs of the federal states. The different character of the election to these houses from the general character of the House of Representatives is justified from the democratic aspect in that the Parliament, as it is composed of the two houses and integrated with the former corrective character of these institutions, reflects as a whole the will of the citizens, and there is not in its parts as they are any contradiction to the rules of representative democracy. Therefore, for the purpose of corrective representation of the interest of the lower and middle socio-economic classes, there is a need for hesitation regarding the election of the representatives of the second house, possessing a status reduced from the original house, namely, whether this will be done by a certain elective public, for example, from a certain income level and below, or by the entire population. Furthermore, from the examination of most types of the existing upper houses in the Western states, it seems that it is worthy to provide a dimension of local representation integrated with the corrective class representation. This not only for reasons of stability and decentralization of power, which already prove themselves as they are, but also because of the need for the existence of a tight connection between the specific needs of the voters against their elected officials, which is sevenfold greater by the nature of the subjects needing correction in this regard. Therefore, the possibility of the division of the social authority will be checked, both from the legislative and the executive aspect, into a central general body which will be composed of the corrective house, of a corrective committee, and of a secretary of the branch who will be elected from within it, and into local corrective councils which will operate in parallel to the local authorities, and which will labor upon local activity through their elected officials and through the local welfare, education, and health mechanisms in their new format. From within the local corrective councils, the region's representatives can be elected to the corrective house, who will elect the executive management of the social authority. But even if we propose that the elected officials of the social authority will be elected, for example, by the local socio-economic public, toward which the activity of the social authority will be directed, and by this, seemingly the impossible cost for candidates who are not capital owners to present their candidacy on the national level, will be reduced in such or another measure. Behold, the claimers will come, and not without justice will say that even today, the majority of the voting population is from a lower and middle socio-economic class. And there is not in this reduction, with its seemingly conceptual problematic nature, enough to neutralize or solve the claim of the capital owner's influence, direct or indirect, on the interests, the expectations, and the needs of the public of elected and voters. Here, the old-new proposal of Montesquieu will stand for test, namely, that the elected shall be only from the elders of the people. The hesitation regarding this matter will be between the approach of excellence, or according to the language of its possible opponents, the elitist approach, according to which the elected shall be those who excelled in fields of influence such as academia, judging, etc., versus a representative approach, according to which the elected shall come from within the classes needing representation, namely, workers, unemployed, people of the welfare departments, and such like. As a rule, I believe that there is no necessity to take extreme ways in this matter, but rather a middle approach, which will allocate in a constitutional manner a place for excellent people from both approaches as one, namely, those who have finished their formal careers and who engaged and proved their talent in matters possessing a social touch, such as education, judging, academia, social work, representatives of workers, representatives of social organizations, people of spirit and culture and other activity, which is not from the field of capital such as banks and insurance companies, and whose personal and public integrity is beyond doubt, and there is between them and the capital owners nothing at all. Extremely severe sanctions will be imposed on corruption and connection between the elected officials of the branch and the capital owners if discovered. For the purpose of a more detailed proposal, I would suggest in this primary manner to learn in an analogical way from the brilliant analysis of Madison in the matter of his proposals for the outlining of the institutions of the American nation, while developing the building of the federal government according to the institutional constitutional development of the states constituting the Union, and the main goals which stood before the new American nation, namely, liberty and stability. As an analogy, it is appropriate in this proposal, as distinguished from Madison's advice, to take into account institutionally also the Montesquieuan equality aspect toward a combined goal of liberty, equality, and stability. Madison seeks to divide the legislative branch into two houses due to the need for representing the people, as well as restraining it. The House of Representatives, elected directly by the people, as distinguished from the Senate, must be composed of representatives whose qualifications shall be identical to those of the electors of the largest branch in number of its members in the state legislatures. According to his method, there is a need to restrain the popular legislative body, whose intensity was envisioned in his eyes as the greatest and therefore the most dangerous to the nation's stability. Madison seemingly rejects entirely the possibility that the members of the House of Representatives will come from among that class that will understand least of all the heart of the masses, and will strive for an ambitious sacrifice of the many for the sake of the glorification of the few. But the very requirement for this matter, as well as his shortened development, reveals that this possibility did not disappear from his eyes at all, but for rather understandable reasons he was not required to it, just as he was not required to the principle of equality from the theory of Montesquieu, and adopted for the United States Constitution two of the three fundamental principles, stability and liberty. This objection is the strangest, even though it is directed against a pseudo-oligarchy. From its essence, it harms the very roots of the Republican government. But it will not occur to the mind, and will not be believed at all, that in a land so enlightened and so blessed, such a fundamental right will be harmed to the detriment of the large majority of the people as a result of the calculated policy of the government, without a popular revolution breaking out.
Madison refers here explicitly to the fear of bias that will act to elevate the rich and the highborn, while suppressing and humiliating all the rest of society. He refers to two main classes, landowners and merchants, and argues that according to the different composition between the states, the chance that this will happen in the Union is lower than that it would happen in the states themselves, where in each one there is an advantage to such or another class. His claim against the influence of the rich and the highborn is, do they dwell only in certain places? Have they by virtue of some miraculous instinct chosen for themselves in each of the states a shared place of residence? A policy that limits the places of election to certain districts is liable to undermine its own goal. The truth is that there is no way to guarantee to the rich from whom we fear, except by means of setting property restrictions for those who can elect or be elected. But such a thing is not included in the authority that will be granted to the national government. Amidst wonderings, Madison asks himself how it is possible to find wise rulers who will discern between the good of the entire society and will possess virtuous qualities which will obligate them to labor upon this good and to take the efficient precautionary measures for the preservation of these virtuous qualities. This goal, like the rest of his goals, will be achieved according to him by means of suitable institutional tools, such as, for example, the splitting of the legislative branch into a popular house and a house possessing a more stable, perhaps more aristocratic, dimension. No less interesting is Madison's analysis regarding the establishment of the Senate. Here, he recommends that the candidate's qualifications be a more mature age, 30 versus 25, a longer period of citizenship, 9 versus 7, and more stability in the duration of the term, every 6 years versus 2 years in the House of Representatives. The nature of the task necessitates a greater scope of information and more stability of character, necessitates that he has reached a stage of life where these advantages are most expected for him, since he immediately manages negotiations with foreign nations. He must be weaned from the customs of his foreign origin and the foreign education of man. Madison recommends that the senator be appointed by the legislature of the national state, and by this will grant to the local governments a role in the design of the federal government, amidst equality of representation between all the states, large and small alike, for the purpose of merging principles of stability of the House of Representatives and equality between the states in the Republic, which possesses a character that is a bit national and a bit federal. This equality of representation stems from a spirit of brotherhood, mutual concession, and sacrifice of America, seeking a shared government with authorities appropriate to its targets. The Senate expresses, therefore, the merging of the principles standing at the head of Madison's concerns. It is an institution merging stability with liberty. Therefore, he requests that its members be elected every 6 years from within the legislatures of the states. In this process, he believes that he will be able to guarantee both stability
and that the elite among the states elected will reach this office. The senator is elected by the legislature of the states. Therefore, usually the most enlightened and respected citizens will be counted among the electing assemblies, and there is a basis to assume that their attention and their voices will be given only to those who gain for themselves the maximum estimation by virtue of their talents and their virtuous qualities, and they fulfilled justified reasons to place trust in them. The Constitution gave its mind to this, that it prevents men less than 35 for the term of president and less than 30 for the Senate, and by this forces the voters to elect only whoever a collective opinion has already been formed about them, and it is not possible to go astray after the sparkling appearance of talent and patriotism, which sometimes has in it enough to dazzle and to mislead as one.
And in analogy to the institutional design of the United States Constitution, according to the principles of stability and liberty, it is worthy to be required to our matter, and to integrate together with these principles within the framework of the institutional correction, also the principle of equality. As I showed above, the legislature in its current state is situated at a low point. Its formal power is as great as it was, but in practice, its action in the majority of Western states is extremely weak, sometimes symbolic, especially in budget issues, which are, of course, most substantive, especially regarding the social structure. Furthermore, according to the basic assumptions of this work, also, the legislature, as well as the executive branch, are subject to most severe influences of that same socio-economic class, which Madison seemingly did not believe could be possible, and did not want to create mechanisms for the prevention of a process of this type, which was reviewed extensively by his conceptual teacher and master, Montesquieu. In this state of affairs, and for the purpose of an institutional integration of those same stability and liberty together with equality, it seems to me, according to an analogy to Madison's proposals, that it is worthy that the corrective house be elected every 6 years for the purpose of outlining stability with professionalism, but this time from an opposite direction to that of Madison, from the classes required of help and correction. This house will engage in all those welfare and social matters, education, health, relief, professional training, subsidization, etc., concerning the question of the social gap, and the lower and middle socio-economic classes, as will be outlined in the corrected Constitution, exactly as the current Second House discusses matters that were in the past of decisive importance, namely, a restrained but representative existence of the various local states. As will be clarified later, and as, by the way, is practiced today in states where a split exists between the houses in the legislative branch, behold in all the contiguous fields, such as, for example, budget matters that are not regulated in the corrected Constitution, a shared mechanism for the regulation of disputes and determination between the houses will be set. In any case, that same phenomenon of accepting exclusive bills by the executive branch, and their approval without an alternative and without discussion, and a possibility of a truly different determination, especially in the discussed social field, will disappear from the democratic liberal world. Each and every society, each and every state, will implement the specific structural character of the corrective house, as well as of the social authority in general, in adjustment to its special structure. Thus, for example, where 2 houses exist, a reform in the upper house will be weighed, and its turning from a regional focus to a regional social focus, or a possibility for the establishment of a 3rd house out of representation for the 3 required principles as detailed above. Or, in states where one and only house exists, a adjusted split, but this time to regional social representation, etc. Likewise, it is appropriate that the members of the corrective house be of the highest personal rank from the aspects of integrity, knowledge, and wisdom, as well as devoid of any connection of interest and of dependence on the class of capital owners. Thus, beyond the essence of their role as it is, with its goals and its institutional character, which will cause an action different from that practiced today in a conflict of interests within the branches, the members of the new house will act in practice and also in appearance
with a necessary discretion for the benefit of the matters subject to this proposal. Therefore, it is appropriate that the age of the members of the corrective house be limited to an age combining respectability, experience, integrity, and proven achievement in the relevant fields, namely welfare, judging, education, etc. Therefore, in the spirit of Montesquieu's proposal, it is proposed that the members of the corrective house be above the age of 60. Likewise, it is proposed that their election shall be from within local councils of the social authority, which will be elected as they are by all the citizens, since it seems to me that it is not possible to limit both in practice and in a conceptual manner the status of the voters, as distinguished from the required qualifications of the elected. The voice of the capital owners and their followers will indeed be identical to that of the other voters, but their unlimited influence in the general elections will be uprooted from the source in all that concerns the social authority. The elections in local welfare councils will cause a direct connection between the voters and their elected officials, who will personally and closely know their affairs, and likewise the election of the best from all the requested perspectives in this process to the National Corrective House as it is will be enabled. It is proposed that the number of the members of the Corrective House be identical or similar to that of the members of the existing House of Representatives, and this in order to express the society's will for a social authority of equal status, possessing authority against the other branches. The need for correcting the social ills stemming from the neglect of the principle of equality and democracy necessitates a respectable corrective house, of equal status, whose members are people of value of the first rank. Nevertheless, the specific design of the corrective house, in accordance with the general principles of the social authority, ought to be adjusted to each and every society in adjustment to the constitutional structure existing in it, its size, its internal division of institutions, and more. Here is the place to be required in a primary manner to the executive aspect of the social authority.
5. הוועד המתקן ומזכיר הרשות הרביעית. על המבנה הביצועי של הרשות הרביעית.
The trend of balance, restraint, and competition against the executive branch and the other branches must also be the domain of the executive aspect of the social branch. It goes without saying that, as noted above, the manner of designing the social authority across its divisions will be done according to the structural social characterization and the decision of each and every society. And yet there is no doubt in my mind, at least according to the analysis above, that a most important place exists for reform in this matter, in its executive sense. The modern executive branch in the democratic liberal states has accumulated great power, too much power. Whether in the ranks of the public service, whether regarding the elected officials coming from the ranks of the current legislative house, or on behalf of whoever was elected to stand at the head of the executive branch, the power of the executive branch overshadows in all fields, all the more so in the fields of general and specific budgeting, over the practical power and authority of the legislative branch. Matters are especially severe due to the hegemony and the decisive influence of the capital owners, in an indirect and often even in a direct manner, on the actions of the executive branch people, in a constant Gordian knot between capital and government. The distinct and built-in conflict of interests between the comprehensive roles of the executive branch and the dominance of the neoliberal approach in a cross-cutting manner over its actions receive double validity as far as matters concern the social functioning of this branch. From it, certainly, the cure for the problems spread out in this work will not come. This pincer of conflict of interests between the excessive tendency toward privatization, whose trend comes mainly from this branch, to a neoliberal policy that seemingly saves on costs and sheds the social and slowly also the other roles of the executive branch, to its traditional social roles, as well as its excessive power in all fields and mainly in this field, teach of the analogical need to the views analyzed above. This need is directed toward the splitting of that same branch in the context of separate and not parallel authorities, and by this both to reduce its power against the renewing legislative branch and to cancel the affliction of conflict of interests and turn it on its face toward competition between efficiency and sociality. as distinguished from the hegemony of one field over the stagnation and decline of the other. This splitting must be done with caution but with determination, amidst a distinct and built-in goal according to what is described in this work, as well as in a manner that possesses learning from the lessons of the past, including in a manner that on the one hand will not cause impossible costs such as those claimed against the welfare state, and on the other hand will act for the stabilization of the harmony and unity between the parts of the state situated in crisis, and will not cause stagnation due to parallel or clashing authorities. Likewise, it is vital that the executive part of the social authority not narrow the steps of civil social initiative, but serve as a source of encouragement and support for it, out of recognition that civil initiative in the social field, as distinguished from the market economic field, cannot come in place of the comprehensive action of society in these matters. Therefore, at this primary stage, it seems to me that there will be a place to examine the possibility of transferring social ministries and distinct social fields from the hands of the existing executive branch to the hands of the executive body of the social authority, which I will call for the purposes of this work, the corrective committee. By this, duplication of authorities and duplication of roles will be avoided, but beyond that, the subordination of the social ministries to the traditionally neoliberal treasury policy, which pushes them to the bottom of the priority list in relation to the utilitarian needs of the shrinking state, that transfers its assets into the hands of the capital owners, will be disconnected, and a built-in problem of conflict of interests will be solved between a branch pulling with all its might toward considerations of utilitarianism, and priorities that shed social economic responsibility from the state to the heads of civil society, which are considerations inherently foreign to the functioning of social ministries. The transfer of ministries, or in other words, institutional authorities of a certain type, from the executive branch, is not an unknown matter to Western democratic regimes. Nor is the division of institutions into parts during a fear of their intensifying power, as clarified above. The most prominent example from the field of the neoliberal view is, of course, the accelerated transfer of the assets and institutions of the executive branch within the framework of the welfare state to the heads of civil society. From the banks, the pensions, health insurances, employment bureaus, through the public means of transportation such as airlines, railways, and more, and in the rest of the fields that have been from then until today essential to the comprehensive functioning of society, which are outside the means of production in their Marxist meaning, such as electricity, water, transportation, and more, and we have already reached fields that are under the authority of the executive branch in its liberal meaning, namely the means of coercion such as prisons, prosecutors in various offices, and such like. If it were possible to transfer the state's main institutions due to a claim that their management is more efficient under the wings of civil society, all the more so when this trend, like any trend or institution granted considerable governmental powers, acted to expand its domains also toward the traditional social domains of the state. I believe that it can indeed be argued that specifically the social domains of the state can and even should be transferred to another branch whose duties toward the citizens are within the framework of the state, but whose authorities are not situated in such an acute conflict of interests with that same branch which seeks and even acts in practice to shed them from its domain of responsibility. The detractors will come and argue that the transfer of specific matters from the state's authority is not like the transfer of entire ministries. An answer to this is that it does not concern the transfer of institutions, whose vital necessity is beyond doubt, to citizens outside the direct domains of the state, as in the privatization process, since those ministries remain in the authority of the state, albeit in a different format. Furthermore, regarding this matter of transferring entire ministries or entire fields that are not the business affairs of the state, precedents also exist, even if we know them in a manner different from that proposed here, and their basis is in an aspiration for regimal stability integrated with liberty or with utility of a different type, regional, federal, national, etc., which answers certain social needs in that period when they were founded. We too discuss the institutional satisfaction of vital social needs, but of another type, suitable for the problems characterizing our period. In institutions of another type, new, no less exciting, and perhaps more so, of an aspiration for stability that is modern, harmonious, moral, value-based, social, and egalitarian-free as one. These social ministries and fields will stand within the framework of the social authority at the head of its priorities and its action within the framework of a different built-in reference that gives emphasis to the needs of the principle of equality and the narrowing of gaps, stemming from its neglect, as distinguished from the needs of efficiency and reduction. These ministries, in their new format, will pass under the rod of the executive branch's criticism within the framework of the mechanisms of balance, checking, and competition between the branches. A possible criticism of this proposal is likely to be from the direction of the state's unity. Removing ministries from the domain of responsibility of the General Treasury Office is likely to be perceived by critics as a proven recipe for budgetary lawlessness and for a significant erosion in the government's ability to govern. To this, it is worthy to answer first that the Treasury will still be entrusted with the proposal of the comprehensive budget within the framework of the state's possibilities, and its approval will be done similarly to what is practiced between parliaments where two houses exist, but through consultation and agreement with the corrective house on a social basis. The influence and determination of the executive branch regarding social matters in the general budget subject to the action of the social authority, as well as the manner of its particular distribution, will be changed from the foundation. Here it is worthy to add and note that there already exist considerable governmental systems in which the Treasury has no real and direct ability for intervention in their budgets. For example, the adjudication system as distinguished from the legal system, namely, through an accountant on behalf of the Treasury Office who sits in them and decides as the Treasury Office wills to where and when the budgets will be directed or requests will be transferred to the table of the Finance Committee, all the more so during a budgetary lack in such or another ministerial branch, because of which there is a need to mobilize a budget from another branch, mainly regarding problems that are within the framework of the comprehensive budget. Furthermore, the disconnection of the Treasury's ability and duty to control the social framework budget, determined in a relative constitutional manner, all the more so in the internal budgetary mobilization during the ongoing annual activity and the transfer of responsibility for this to another branch, do not nullify the Treasury's ability and duty to give its mind within the framework of checks and balances to efficiency problems in the social authority if they occur. And to this I have already been required previously and will be required in the continuation. One of the basic assumptions of this work is that the executive branch today possesses a distinct and built-in tendency, due to the influence of the capital owners and the dominant neoliberal doctrine, toward the implementation of neoliberal principles including the reduction of the state to a minimum, not only in the economic business field, but also in distinct social matters such as welfare, education, health, and employment, while placing its central role on violence, internal and external, and the efficiency that enables a free market in all fields of society. This tendency necessarily causes an action possessing a utilitarian emphasis, both in the cross-cutting aspects between the prime ministers and treasury offices and the social ministries, and in the determination of policy and allocation of resources in the social ministries themselves, in which, according to the claim in this work, a fundamentally different approach is required. An integrated approach that does not turn a blind eye to efficiency aspects, but places emphasis on the promotion of the affairs over which these ministries are entrusted, on the needs of the lower and middle socioeconomic classes. The central and practical claim in this work is that a procedural substantive change of the type proposed, in itself, will have in it, upon its practical developments, which will be derived from the different ways in the various democratic liberal societies in which it will be implemented, to significantly and possibly even dramatically change the image of society regarding its treatment of the problems of substantive equality within its domains, not to mention other fields, cultural and solidary as one. As it was possible to witness, mainly in the practical chapter, it was enough for me, certainly in this primary work, to be required in the most general manner to the issue of the practical structure of the various proposed organs of the social authority. Justly would the detractors argue before me that that same integration of a legislative organ and an executive organ in the social authority requires further detail, especially in the context of the executive aspect of the social authority, out of an assumption that the legislative aspect is more understood against a background of common parliamentary splits in the Western world, albeit on a regional background. Thus, will these say justly that the claim regarding the possibility of transferring social ministries to a treatment devoid of conflicts of interests, which has in itself to bring the longed-for result, is not enough? How will these function in relation to the executive branch, in relation to the legislative organ of the social authority, and mainly, why will there be in this split the capacity to enable in a real manner treatment of the middle and weak populations that indeed will have in it that longed-for dramatic change and not, heaven forbid, encumbrance, corruption, and double disappointment after the failure of the welfare state?
In the absence of proven experience for a reform of this type, except in ancient times, except for an analogy to reforms and changes on a different background, I have nothing but to turn to the thinkers who preceded this work, and to channel their general and tangible principles into the constitutional goals of the entire social authority, all the more so in its executive aspects. The goals of the social authority in generalization are action in accordance with the principle of substantive equality, including concern for the social minimum conditions for the population and active indirect action for the narrowing of gaps in society. Its action will be performed through legal processes in integration with the existing lower house, as I showed in the previous chapters, and through the action of the social ministries within the framework of implementing a different policy, whose goals will be defined in a general practical manner according to Rawls's 4 background institutions. From vague background institutions, secondary and adjunct to the action of the existing branch, in a manner that is clearly not implementation capable, the principle of substantive equality will be shifted from its secondary place to the front of the stage, to a central and primary location in the social executive authority. Indeed, the manner of the social authority's functioning against the other branches could not be proposed precisely in advance, and it will be the fruit of that same competition and struggle between the specific branches in the different societies, with their different emphases. However, the very procedural substantive change will have in it to provide a cure for that longing of many years and disappointments of so many parts of society for the arrival of substantive equality, not in contradiction to substantive liberty. The detractors will come and argue that in this proposal there is something of bringing the welfare state through the back door, and it is not so. In the hands of the executive branch and the lower house, the central influence, though not the exclusive one, will remain over the size of the comprehensive budget from which the budget of the social authority will be derived in a constitutional manner, and the matters will be clarified in the next chapter. But beyond that, and in the context of the chapter in which we engage, the action of the social executive branch, in contrast to the action of the social institutions in the welfare state that disappeared and was suppressed, will be implemented in a built-in and regulated competitive manner against the existing executive branch. Thus, the question will not stand in the air, welfare yes or no, but the state's responsibility for the social security of its citizens will be returned in an enlightened, regulated, responsible, and built-in manner in adjustment to its capacities and its built-in utilitarian needs. Through mutual competition and restraint, it will be possible to reach a sharp coexistence of both the substantive values of liberty and equality as one, and not one at the expense of the other. Through social and financial restraint together, and not apart. Just as the institutional mechanisms were established, which acted with such great success for the preservation of these societies, mainly from the liberty aspect, and for the determination in all that concerns the existence and the regional stability of the democratic liberal society, for example between the federal and regional authority, whether through joint sessions of the Houses of Parliament or through a constitutional or accounting Supreme Court, so will institutional mechanisms be established this time, which will act from the social economic aspects and will determine in the disputes between the branches according to built-in constitutional principles, until the social goal for whose sake they were established is achieved.
A central subject within the framework of checking the possibility for the establishment of a corrective committee and a secretary of the branch regarding the executive and legislative action of the social authority is connected to its budget, in its specific determination and in the manner of use and its specific allocation, including the distribution of the budget of the social authority and the surplus funds that will be transferred to its authority from the executive branch. Here, work must be done for the outlining of rules and a structure which will channel the funds to the goals for whose sake the branch was established, and not for the maintenance of an institutional mechanism. Within the framework of this outlining, and according to the lessons from the intellectual chapter, it is appropriate that the executive mechanism of the branch be reduced as much as possible in a constitutional manner, and whose expenses, including the salaries, shall be subject to supervision, not only internal in the branch itself, but also by the other branches, as authorities parallel to the authority of the social authority for supervision toward the other branches, which shall be by the nature of things possessing different emphases. The general principles of the purpose and manner of the distribution of funds will be determined in the Constitution and detailed in laws, which will enable the heads of the branch and its representatives to be required for the implementation of its goals, including for professional training and the granting of socio-economic minimum conditions from the field of housing, health, education, etc., which will enable the existence of a free self-autonomy, as well as a balanced distribution of resources, whether by means of an addition to incomes or subsidies for commodities according to proven wage data and family status, or to small and medium employers according to status and a specific and audited action plan, and such like subjects possessing importance in accordance with the branch's goals, its authorities, its manner of action, and its relations with the other branches. From all the aforementioned, it is clear that even if the social authority shall possess a unique legislative authority and a clear executive authority, which in a theoretical general manner it can be assumed that its integration with the other branches is possible, behold, these authorities of its will be empty of content if the control over the resources concerning them remains in the hands of the other branches alone. Therefore, I will be required below to the issue of the budget of the social branch.
6. התקציב. על עצמאות הרשות הרביעית והתחרות בין הרשויות.
In my taste, there is no doubt that the social authority must be independent and separate. This independence must integrate with the existing mechanism in a complementary manner, which will not cause stagnation or social instability. For this purpose, it is appropriate that the social authority have a fixed constitutional budget and possibly also a variable budget. The fixed budget can be a certain percentage of the general revenues of the state and also of the state's budget, and all this in a constitutional manner which will reflect the importance and the weight given to the social aspects in the modern state, and will prevent a possibility of the capital owner's influence and ability for change and intervention by the executive or legislative branch as they are. It seems that this matter of budgetary constitutional independence of branches is not new, even if it is different in its emphases between the different societies. Furthermore, in not a few Western regimes, there exists an assessment between that act of establishing the budgetary framework, which is a prerogative of the executive branch's initiative, with the approval of the general legislative branch, as distinguished from the secondary one, and the specific budgeting process of the various ministries, of the various branches, of the expenses from the central government to the federal states. However, even this budgeting is brought throughout the entire Western world to the Parliament by the Treasury offices, whose influence on the decision regarding the budgeting of those ministries, as distinguished from their influence on the budgeting of the legislative and judicial branches, is decisive. In all the Western constitutions which were diagnosed in this work, I did not see even one example of a difference from the perspective of the financial legislative initiative between the process of outlining the general framework and the specific process. Indeed, it can be seen that in certain and not many parliaments, a real confrontation exists, or at least an attempt at confrontation, with this problem of over-dominance of the executive branch in the field of specific fund allocations, which are a decisive part in the design of the society's path, whether by the existence of various thematic committees against the General Finance Committee, whether in an attempt at the professionalization of the Finance Committee members to various ministerial fields, whether by means of establishing bodies providing information directly to the Parliament regarding the Treasury's actions, the revenues, the expenses, and other vital information for the approval of the new budget, up to the establishment of advisory and even judicial institutions of accounting, for the purpose of supervision and control over the state's revenues and expenses. And yet it seems that even in those few parliaments, all the more so in others, it is not possible to reach a real balance, conceptual and practical, in all that concerns the decisive influence of the executive branch on the ramified and rooted information and influence mechanisms in its possession regarding the management and legislation of the general and specific budgeting, and between the structural lack of capacity of the individual parliament members, as well as institutions devoid of real teeth to influence in the core of things, as distinguished from their margins. In the current structure, it is not possible to influence in a built-in, orderly, equal status and equal capacity manner to the executive branch on the budgeting, not to mention presenting a serious alternative budget, in any type of general social view possessing such or another tendency, according to the public's political determination. Of course, beyond the built-in structural aspects, which do not enable real balance between the action of the executive and legislative branch in the financial field, behold, the coalitional aspect also exists, for example in Israel, Britain, or the influence of the head of state and the party mechanism, for example France, the United States, which also usually make it difficult for the possibility of the Parliament to constitute a real counterweight to the power of the executive branch, of the built-in mechanism and mainly of the Treasury offices in the so decisive process of the general and specific budgeting of the state institutions. As noted above, this parliamentary weakness did not disappear, of course, from the eyes of the parliaments through their generations in the different societies, and various solutions and proposals were raised and seemingly implemented in order to change the lack of balance. And yet all those proposals, exactly as noted in the chapter regarding the corrective house, concern mere power balances which the action of the political reality is liable to empty of practical, substantive content, and not innovative, reformative, intermediary power balances toward a different social trend, toward true competition and balance between the branches over the good of the people, across all its layers. This trend, this stagnation, fits the basic assumptions of this work regarding the centers of power and influence in the democratic liberal society, which do not enable in the current structure a reform and change of the type requested in this work. The constitutional comparative check, as well as the reforms and the proposals, for example regarding the Israeli parliament, teach that indeed a problem exists concerning the specific matter in which we engage of the weakening of the parliament against the executive branch. The trend of the noticeable decline in the Parliament's power, as presented in the previous chapters, receives a distinct expression regarding the budgetary aspects of the state branch's functioning, including the processes of accepting the budget. The solutions which were implemented and proposed in these matters are different and diverse between society and society, but in all of them is noticeable that same trend which was claimed in the work, that of a real lack of ability to balance between the branches due to the procedural structure of the regime, which has not changed a real change for generations, despite the substantive change of the society's composition and the centers of influence in it. Part of the proposals sought to increase the power of the government ministries against the Treasury in the process of its general and specific design of the budget. But they encountered fierce opposition of the Treasury, of course. Part of them sought to change in a structural, procedural manner the way of the budget's approval in the Parliament, whether by increasing the duration of time available to the members, splitting the Parliament committees discussing in a general and specific manner the budget, in the professionalization of the members against the various ministries, in the providing of an independent research body which will advise the Parliament and provide in its hand the information required for decision-making, including amendments against the governmental budget proposal and its implementation, and up to a structural substantive proposal seeking not only to change the structure of supervision and discussion in the budget, but also the committee's authorities to comprehensive, substantive influence on the budget as a whole, and in a specific manner alike. These proposals were not accepted, and not for nothing, since in order to change the balance of relations between the Parliament and the executive branch, there is a need for something substantive, which is beyond the will to change a matter that is in a general principled way improper. Here, it is worthy to return and note that which is emphasized in this work throughout its entire length and breadth. A procedural change within the existing institution, without changing the institution as it is. Its end is that it will not lead to any real result. Even if more time and more extensive information are given into the hands of the members, behold, a low probability exists that they will act against their party leaders who man the elected leadership of the executive branch, who need the capital owners for the purpose of their advancement and perhaps their political survival, as well as the influence of the latter on the bureaucratic decision-makers in the public administration of this branch. Thus, for example, it is clear that the compositions of the committees discussing the financial subjects will be by the nature of things coalitional compositions. The interests which will obligate the Parliament members in their work against the government will not be contradictory to an extent that will enable balance, restraint, and checking of the executive branch on its utilitarian aspects against the required democratic aspects. The influence of the government and the Treasury on the decision-makers in the Parliament is liable not to change, at least not in a significant manner, especially in regimes where coalitional discipline is a cornerstone in the regimal process, in its stability and its ways of functioning. And all this without entering into the influence of the capital owners on the Parliament members themselves. From all those constitutions that were checked, I did not find even one mechanism that possesses a proper democratic balance to the authority and utilitarian tendency of the executive branch. Although I certainly noticed somewhat halting trends, localized, general, against that same hegemony, and for which the explanation for their minority and poverty was given in this work as detailed above. My claim in this regard is that it is possible to create a different structural budgeting mechanism in Western society, which will be compatible with the claim raised in this work. It seems that the answer to the question of this possibility indeed exists before our eyes. The distinction between traditional budgeting and specific budgeting, between independent budgeting for the general branches, as well as a framework budget for the federal states, or for the authorities managing it in an independent, supervisable manner, that is, not balanced, against the central federal branch. All these, in a synthesis from the aspect claimed in this work, point toward a different budgeting possibility. To a division between general budgeting, which will remain in a general format similar to that existing in terms of the initiative in the hands of the executive branch, and yet different in that it will require such or another shared decision of the new Houses of Parliament, and therefore will possess greater and more substantive supervision than the situation existing today. And between constitutional budgeting for the executive branch on its authorities, for the judicial branch, for the lower house, and for the social authority, which will also manage in practice its budget in an independent manner, capable of balancing and balanced supervision against the executive authority and the other branches. But beyond the budgetary division in adjustment to the constitutional instructions in this regard, as well as for the independent action of the social authority according to its goals, it is appropriate to propose in a primary manner an additional possible mechanism that will have in it to outline a procedure of competition between the social authority and the executive authority. As distinguished from the fixed budget, it will be proposed that a variable budget shall exist, which is beyond the fixed one, which shall be the fruit of competition with the executive branch. This concerns in practice a surplus budget, in the possibility to allocate more resources than those allocated originally in the general constitutional budget, but this time not as a drawing stone, as a bottomless pit, as was claimed toward the welfare state, but in a competitive, balancing, and corrective manner against the executive branch. In a general manner, and except for special circumstances which will necessitate a joint session of the Houses of Parliament in accordance with the mechanism that will be set, the social authority will not have in its hand a possibility to deviate from its budget, except by means of the variable budget. Here I would propose in a primary manner, and again on the basis of the existing structure, that in all the organs of the social authority, or in the central ones among them, according to an agreed and parallel determination, in adjustment to the budgetary capacity of the branch, a representative of the Treasury Office shall be present who shall be a sort of accountant auditor, as distinguished from the role of the accountant executor common today. In parallel, a treasurer auditor on behalf of the social authority shall sit in all departments of the executive branch, or in parallel in the central ones among them, and especially in the Treasury Office. The role of these office holders shall not be executive, but rather investigative and recommendatory. All material related to the economic activity of the branches shall be open and transparent before them, and their findings and ongoing recommendations shall be transferred to the branches for the purpose of negotiations regarding the variable budget of the social authority and efficiency reasons of the executive branch. The social authority shall have the authority to present before a tribunal, which will be determined from the 2 elected houses proposed in this regard, claims regarding wasted funds according to preset criteria of the executive branch, and to demand their receipt. Whereas the executive branch shall have a parallel authority, but this only as far as matters concern the variable budget of the social authority alone, as distinguished from the fixed one. Regarding the fixed budget, the executive branch shall have the authority to demand the tribunal's determination for its operation in a more efficient manner, should it concern an extraordinary deviation from proper administration. The disputes which will be discussed in the tribunal between the executive branch and the social authority within the framework of the competition for surplus or wasted funds shall not require legislation, as distinguished from the approval of budgets not yet granted, especially in issues of surplus funds, namely, those that are beyond the fixed constitutional budget of the social authority. The tribunal will be required to a determination in the competition between the social authority and the executive branch regarding wasted funds, allocation of funds to projects in which there are no substantive infrastructure issues such as the expansion of the public mechanism, the building of magnificent buildings that can be functioned in even without them, and such like matters that will constitute the core of the competition, creating the efficiency and the equality between the branches in the new and different format of the democratic liberal state.
שביעי, מפרוצדורה למהות, סיכום, מסקנות וסגירת מעגל. הגיגים לעניין אופן ואופק פעולתה של הרשות הרביעית.
The proposed work is in practice an introductory work, an introduction to the discussion regarding the change necessary for the democratic liberal society in the neoliberal global era, at whose center is the problem of social gaps affecting the majority of citizens, and the confrontation required with it by the institutions of the society aspiring to both economic and social progress as one. By the nature of things, there is no capacity and also no aspiration within the framework of this work to be required for all the subjects, the disputes, and the implications of a broad proposal of this type. Beyond this, in analogy to the custom of well-known thinkers, it is enough for me in this work to be required for the examination of the possible necessity of the social authority from within liberal thought. All the more so for an additional discussion regarding the possibility of its establishment from a procedural perspective within the framework of the liberal democratic state in a gradual manner. And this out of a basic assumption according to which the procedural change in itself will lead to a substantive change in the functioning of Western society across its various socio-economic parts. And yet, specifically at the end of the work, and after the primary infrastructure has been laid in my view, and the primary conclusions have been derived from the discussion of it, I find a place to be required, even in the manner of reflections, to the question of the manner and horizon of the actual functioning of the social authority, within the framework of the new comprehensive structure of society. Even if I assume that this matter will be left to the gradual determination of society, within the framework of the democratic struggles within and between the branches in the new structure. all the more so for other discussions or for an intellectual discussion from different and other fields than those in which emphasis was placed in this work. Behold, it seems to me that there is a place to be required at the conclusion of the applied chapter in a manner that closes a circle in this work, whose beginning is intellectual and its continuation is applied structural. To general thoughts regarding the possible manner of the branch's action, or in other words, what is the general direction to which I would want such a change to lead? How in practice will the establishment of the branch lead to the design of a society combining interest and material achievement with social solidarity, and focusing on the human being, in the establishment of the autonomy of his will and his capacity upon its significant implications toward a different type of achievement, in different fields than those raised to greatness today, until it seemed for a moment that they belonged to other and distant periods from us. A society in which material achievement is one aspect and not a finished or absolute one of human nature and its aspirations. The democratic Western society performed great and wondrous things during approximately the first 200 years of its existence and its accelerated development, for the fixing of its liberal aspects, which are so vital to the development of the thinking person, aspiring to find his happiness, for the exhaustion of his talents and capacities. Within the framework of its natural development process, which is different to such or another extent between the different societies, Western society succeeded in confronting the ethnic regional problems of its parts, in a manner which can be said in a general way that not only preserved its framework, but also brought together with the economic technological developments, which are, in its essence, to the reduction of these differences up to their practical nullification. Now, since it is possible to derive the proper conclusions from the intellectual and practical attempts from the democratic egalitarian field of Western society and the other societies, the time has come to be required in a serious manner to that which threatens and is likely to threaten with greater intensity the liberty aspects of this society from within and without. The establishment of the social authority on its legislative and executive aspects will be a day of celebration for the comprehensive free spirit of the human being, seeking to return to society its general and regulated commitment to the granting of suitable conditions, and a continuous and nourishing functioning for that same happiness which the formal aspects of Western society and its conceptual infrastructure seemingly enable, but not in practice. The disappointment from all those proposals which did not succeed due to their action against liberty, or the unbearable burden which they imposed on the capacities of society, must not cause the seething mind of the free person to cease from creating, aspiring, and hoping for the correction of the unfree and anti-democratic reality in its deepest sense, toward which Western society is now marching with open eyes due to those same disappointments. The establishment of this social institution, which will be led by means of democratic elections by the elders of the community, and will be manned by decent and worthy people, by professionals from the social fields, in which there will be a distinct worthy goal for its action, as well as mechanisms which will act for the prevention of its corruption, as well as its intensification at the expense of the balance with the other branches, will have in it to return the honor and value to the legislative institution. There will be in it a competition possessing teeth against the foreignness, the alienation, the pure utilitarianism of the existing executive institutions. There will be in it an appropriate institutional response to the need for the implementation of the second supreme principle, substantive equality. The establishment of the social authority is likely to calm the boiling that is increasingly bubbling within Western society and outside it, insofar as where there is no true cure for the social economic problems of the person, other possibilities from the field of fanaticism, violence, mysticism, and despair always exist. The strengthening of the legislative institution in such a significant and deep manner, as well as the balanced change and confrontation with the way of the current executive branch, are likely to return the joy of public action to the best sons and daughters of society, who will turn not only to business, but also to engagements in the fellow person and the advancement of the social and practical status of the people of welfare, education, help to the fellow, culture, and all those fields which have by their side a welfare between person and friend, and not necessarily a profit between person and material. The ability to influence, the raising of the social value of the social doers and decision-makers, the honor and the esteem which society will give into the hands of those doing in this field, which was pushed to a most dangerous corner, will have in them to enable constructive struggles of equal power between the branches over the internal image of society. Thus, a free and orderly democratic mechanism will be created regarding the action concerning the narrowing of social gaps, a procedural substantive mechanism, a corrective mechanism. This correction is likely to return to Western society those same values that were lost to it in the pursuit of its best sons and daughters after the golden calf possible today only for the few. Values of social solidarity, decency, respect for the fellow, development of all those capacities of the person in fields that are not necessarily connected with an obsessive pursuit after money, due to the change of social values and the ability to exist not only for the sake of economic survival, but also and mainly for the sake of enjoyment in its deep meaning from the short time given to us here. The social authority is likely to cause the institutions of society to become more balanced in all that concerns the image and the path of society inwardly, including in the issues that interest human beings in their real personal lives, in their life conditions, in their possibility to blossom and prosper in a personal and communal manner as one. The activity of an independent social branch, from the level of the city and the village up to the supreme institutions of society, will also act to provide a possibility for a significantly greater competition with the entry of many additional citizens into the circle of free and initiating economic activity. It will fertilize society and march it forward. Not the thin man and the fat man, but the human being as he is, the equal human, the free human, the human returning to his value as an autonomous, thinking, and enlightened human being. The closing of the circle of the thinking human will not be in his accelerated progress in one path, but in giving honor to his past, to his thinkers, to his failures, and the derivation of his conclusions, while maintaining a rational, corrected, sober, and practical vision toward a future in which there is indeed the capacity to aspire, as well as to act, for the maximization of the happiness of the individual, wherever he may be, and his striving for a life possessing meaning.